If you're feeling stuck, first of all, I'm here to tell you it's totally normal and it's okay. Even to this day, I feel stuck maybe every other week in my corporate career. And when I had my own business and I started that and I ran that for about 6-7 years, I felt stuck most of the time because it was just a bunch of responsibilities piling up. I only wish in hindsight I had some of these tips to take care of myself so that I could have had a more measured response rather than emotionally and abruptly react to that feeling of being lost and stuck. So today I'm going to share 3 really simple and actionable tips with you that work for me, and I hope they help. The first one I like to call the non-negotiables, right? And think of these as the small little victories that you have, the building blocks of building a very strong foundation for yourself. So if you do feel stuck, you're not in the worst place, right? You're not in this dark hole where you're just going to keep feeding that feeling constantly. And I'll give you some examples for me, right? A non-negotiable every day, if I go into the office, which is most of the days a week, because I'm fortunate enough to be in Sydney and our corporate head office is near the Sydney Opera House, every time I go in, I make sure that I block out 30 minutes to do a Sydney Opera House walk, because I'm a firm believer that different environments inspire different styles of thinking, and a bit of fresh air will push that creative bone in my body. Walking's the best because it clears your head, but you get nice little surprises like this sometimes. Check it out. Another non-negotiable for me is in the mornings. When we wake up early, my wife and I make sure to have a coffee together and take in the sunset, because it really helps set our day up. Not in a way like, oh wow, we can really feel that we're going to go crush it today because we had that quality time. But again, it's the little things, it's the amino acids that help build up, who you are that day and that week.
Nice to have a front row ticket to the World Championships of Snoring last night in the bedroom.
Really?
Between you and Lenny, whatever the fuck time that was before.
And I travel quite a bit for work, right? So, I used to love it when I was younger, but I dread it quite a bit as I get older because I just want to be in my own home for most of the time. I think the introvert in me is creeping out and kind of poking its head out now. But I always make sure that I behave like a tourist or make the time to do so. So even though my calendar's packed, I make the time or I block out time to make sure that I had some fun. Like, for example, I was in New Zealand pretty recently on business and my day was chockers. The other side is the bridge. But I made sure that after a particular meeting, because I was nearby, I drove to check out one of the local volcanoes, which was a really cool moment. This is all real volcanic rock. And there's a volcano. That's unreal. Because I was like, wow, how often do you get to stand on a beach and check out something that could potentially just erupt? Now, the second one sounds really simple, but it works. It's get a hobby, right? And I've got a more, cooler way of describing this. I call it the 80-20 rule. And it's really important. My wife's in human resources, and there's a bunch of leaders within industries that also swear by it. All the talent that they speak to, that they peg as high performers and eventually, prove their worth, they all aren't 100% in their job. They've all got some sort of side interest or hobby. And I call it the 80-20 rule because I like to think if you put 80% in your day job or whatever career you have or whatever you're working on, even if it's a startup, and set aside 20% in another interest, and you make sure that interest you have control over in terms of the amount of progress you can make, and I'll give some examples in a second, it helps kind of balance out how you feel as an individual, how much progress you're making, how much growth you're getting. So it helps avoid that feeling of getting stuck, I think, a lot, and it works a lot for me. Because if you're at 100% in anything, right, it's impossible not to get emotionally attached to it. When it's good, but when it's bad, it gets really bad. That's why I don't like the word passion too much, and I try not to describe things or people or myself as passionate, because again, passion, when it's great and it's strong, it's amazing, right? But when it's bad, it can really suck. and you can kind of pull morale down if you're a passionate individual in that way when things aren't going your way. So the 80-20 rule is really good. And for me, the 20% I allocate in a couple of areas. I try not to peg it to like health and wellness stuff, because you should be doing that for yourself anyway. Like, going for walks or going to the gym or whatever. But the 20% for me, one of them is I'm working on a full back tattoo right now. I love my ink because all of it tells a story. This one's really important to me because it's linked to my heritage, my grandparents who grew up in the circus. Maurice, who just turned 100 years old, he was the strongman, and Helen was the trapeze artist, and they met there and they had a really lovely love story there. So I want that on my back. And that's something I can control, because over time I'll go and do a session every month, and that's an 8-hour session I dread because it hurts a lot. And I've done my reading right. It's not me getting weaker or a bit of a coward when it comes to ink. As you get older, because I'm pushing 40, your skin actually gets thinner, and that's why it hurts more. But I like spreading it out over time, right? Because it's something I can look forward to every other month. And seeing it just develop on my back just makes me smile, and it's something really cool. Another area that I allocate my 20% to is actually this YouTube channel. I've made a promise to myself I'll do it for a year before I even look at any metrics, because it's just an outlet for creativity, right? And progress for me in this area is as long as I pick up editing tricks, pick up better ways to tell stories, figure out what my angle is or like my style of shooting is. That's progress for me, right? And I can control that. And for you, it might be sports. It might be an instrument. It might be a martial art. I just think if it's something where you can see yourself growing in that area, it helps you not feel as stuck in general across the board. Now, I'll give you a bad example for me. I used to have a crypto and stock portfolio. I still have it. I just don't check it anymore. That I used to check every other day. And that's an example of, even though I put a lot of effort into it.
That is not good.
Because I didn't have control, and I just look at it some days and it'd just be red, in the negatives. So that 20% actually made my 80% feel worse. Because what you'll find is if work is not progressing or you're not growing there, which is fine sometimes because it's a seasonal thing, or you might be going through a rough patch, you don't just kind of drop your tools and give up and you kind of kick up a storm. It's one of those where, okay, well, my 20% area, I'm actually still growing, still learning, still doing all those things. So it kind of feeds your soul in a positive way that way. And what you'll find is eventually sometimes work will be the area of great progress and growth, and your hobby or your interest, you might have hit a wall for a bit that you need to figure out. So they kind of help each other out. It's like a bit of a seesaw of progress, which is very important. And I guess the whole point of the hobby and the interest point is when you think about when you feel stuck, it's really balancing out patience and progress, right? If you can find progress in other areas of your life that allows you to be a bit more patient with work or wherever you're feeling stuck, it'll help you outlast that feeling, because I promise you there will be growth in that area as long as you look at it in a positive way, right? Now, the third point I feel gets more and more important naturally as you get older, and it's reconnecting with your roots, right? It's all about perspective. I think we'll call this one perspective, because if you're lucky enough to have your parents still around or your grandparents, sit down with them and ask them about their journey. What did they have to go through? What have they done? It really helps put things into perspective for you with your current day life. And it also makes you feel grateful. Now, I'm not saying you don't get to feel what you feel. You absolutely do. But when I spoke, for example, to my grandpa, who just turned 100, and he told me about how he met Helen, our grandma, in the circus, who was the trapeze artist when they were just kids, and they literally had to perform on the streets every day without any breaks to make enough money to feed the family and everyone. You just go, wow, I'm here complaining about I'm not feeling fulfilled in my job right now. It's very different, right? And, funnily enough, they exhibited super entrepreneurial traits before it was even a word. My grandpa set up a garage, and because he was great with his hands, it was called the New Garage. He basically devised a way to extend the local Jeeps within Darjeeling at the time, so they could fit an extra row of seats. And funnily enough, it was a bit of an IP theft, but what could you do back then? There was a huge manufacturer that caught wind of it, because all of these taxi drivers would go to Maurice to get their cars extended. that they essentially told him he should stop doing it, a bit of a cease desist, and then started rolling out these new taxis in cars with the extra rows of seats that he would be putting in, because he would essentially split it down the middle, weld a new section in the middle with seats, and kind of help people that way. Because as you could imagine, as a taxi driver, if you could suddenly start shuttling around, you know, an extra 3-4 people, especially in that part of the world, it was a game changer, right? And you know, just thinking like that, and him taking care of 40 kids and giving them jobs, it's like, wow, you know, that's really something to aspire to do. It doesn't have to be, you know, what's an idea that's going to change the world, or what's the new kind of technology I can ride that wave on and try and get a ridiculous valuation. I really admire entrepreneurs and businesses like that, where they solve a problem, they just grow organically, and they're not trying to chase these crazy valuations and take care of a bunch of people. You know, that's super admirable. And you know, when I think about my mom and my dad was the first Tibetan to come to Australia. He was the Dalai Lama's bodyguard because he knew Taekwondo and they wouldn't allow weapons around him. And my mom was the Nepalese entrepreneur who brought chai tea to Australia, because long story short, they'd do a food stall, which we still do to this day, in Paddington Markets in Sydney, called the Himalayan Cuisine. And there's a concert called Big Day Out in Australia, and there were lines and lines of people waiting for food, and she would brew chai in the morning and serve them in little cups, right, to keep them happy in the queue. And one day there was the CEO of Gloria Jeans in the line, and he loved it, right? And to cut that story short, they brewed a formula that was very palatable for Australians. So would never know these stories until I sit down and speak to my relatives and my family members, and have a really patient and open mind. And it's just inspiring, right? And it puts things into perspective. So reconnect with your roots. And if you're still feeling stuck, it's okay, right? These tips are just to help you build yourself up, so that when you do feel that, you don't the world's not falling down, you know, the roof isn't collapsing over your head. Just sometimes accept it's a feeling and just kind of go through it like emotion. It's just like fear, right? Courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over that feeling. You know, similarly, feeling stuck or lost, everyone goes through it, everyone feels it. It's just a part of being a human being, I feel, because it's almost like a bit of a catalyst or a prod from our soul to be like, hey, we just want you to keep growing, keep progressing, keep exploring. Because when you think about our ancestors, we were quite nomadic individuals, right? So if you're stuck in a home, in a lovely way, because, you know, being stuck in a home is a good thing, but what I mean is being planted in one location, I think in our genetics, right, we might feel stuck because we want to be moving around. All right, hopefully those 3 tips were helpful, but you got this. Go do what you got to do. And the next time you feel stuck, just remind yourself, hey, this is totally fine, totally normal. I'll speak to you again soon. Good luck.
The door. The compartment is open. The door is closing. Please be careful. The task is complete. Please give me a positive comment if you are satisfied with my service.